Hello, everyone. Eric Grenier here, and welcome to the 122nd episode of the Writ Podcast. It's been a big week in the Alberta NDP leadership race. It all got started when Rachel Notley announced in January that she would be stepping aside, and there was a good slate of candidates that came forward. But already we have one of the contenders dropping out and endorsing one of the other candidates. So to break down how this race is shaping up and what the latest developments will mean, I'm joined by two people who know the Alberta NDP very well. Leah Ward is Vice President at Wellington Advocacy, and Cheryl Oates is co-host of the Discourse podcast, and both are former directors of communications for Rachel Notley. Leah, Cheryl, thanks so much for joining me.
Thanks for having us.
So I want to get into each of the different campaigns and sort of how they're shaping up and what their chances are. But I feel like we do need to start with what was, I think, the biggest news, the biggest kind of surprise from this week. So Rakhi Pancholi, who was really seen as one of the front runners, she dropped out of the race. She endorsed Naheed Nenshi. I'd like to hear from both of you what this does to the race. Cheryl, why don't you kick us off?
Sure. Maybe I'll just start by saying I was so disappointed to see Rakhi drop out of the race at this point. I think even watching the video that she released to announce that she would drop and endorse Naheed Nenshi, she's just displaying so many of the incredible qualities that it takes to be leader of the official opposition and hopefully eventually premier. And I just think she added so much to this race and was driving a lot of the conversation. So I think it's a big loss for the race itself and a big loss for the party, for those that were paying attention and following Rakhi. In terms of what it does to the race, again, people are talking, which is always a good thing. But I think that there is sort of this message that's coming from Rakhi stepping down and some of the pictures coming out of Naheed Nenshi's campaign that this is over now. And as a passionate observer, I don't think it's over. I think Naheed Nenshi has had a really wonderful 2 weeks and that this is not a sprint. This is a marathon, and he's got to maintain that momentum all the way to and through the vote. And that is much harder to do than launch a campaign with a big bang.
Cheryl, you mentioned just people talking about it. I think even here, there's more people talking about the Alberta NDP leadership race than there was for the Ontario NDP leadership race in Ontario. So that gives you an indication of how much attention this is getting. Leah, what do you think? How do you think this changes the race, if at all?
I mean, Rakhi, I think, was leading, certainly among the candidates who had declared before Nenshi entered the race. And I think, I certainly echo Cheryl's thoughts and feelings about seeing a robust race play out and the value of that for the party. Whether or not any of the other candidates can compete with the momentum that he's been able to generate in a short time, I think that those were the cards that Rakhi was sort of reading. And if you did get a chance to look at that video, I agree with Cheryl on this point as well. It was very gracious. It showed a dedication to province over party and party over person. So, she had she hit all the right notes in that way. But what she articulated there, and folks can disagree, but what she articulated was that her motivation for running for leader was to see the party grow, was to bring more people into the Alberta NDP and to demonstrate to folks that the values of the Alberta NDP are mainstream Alberta values, so that we could continue to grow and be competitive in the next election. And so for her, if those were the main priorities and she was able to see another candidate gain more momentum than her on a similar pitch, it made sense. There's some cogence to the idea that she would fold and get behind that. That being sort of the central goal of her leadership. I agree. I would have loved to see her on stage. I would have loved to see her, engage in the debate. I think she was really driving a lot of the conversation and had a really positive and exciting energy around her. So I'm sad to see that go away as part of the race. But hopefully, as much as she was contributing those things to the race as a leader, she'll bring them to the Nenshi team, because of course she's not only endorsed him but taken a position on the campaign.
I don't know if either of you have any inside knowledge or anything like that, but I think what I did see was that the leadership, the membership of the party was somewhere around 16,000 at the beginning of the year. Rakhi Pancholi said that the membership doubled, but she also mentioned tens of thousands of new members. Not sure if Nenshi is responsible for them all. Do either of you have any idea of where the membership currently stands?
I can start, Leah, if you want. So 16,000 is accurate. It was just over 16,000 as of December 31st. Now, the campaigns are each getting updates every week that show the data that each campaign is putting in, but no one has any idea whose members are whose. So you can look at it and say, wow, the membership list has grown by X number, but there's no way to say Naheed Nenshi has sold this portion of these new memberships. And that membership list won't be finalized until after the membership deadline closed. And of course, the NDP in Alberta does a vetting process as well to make sure that everyone who joins the party is joining because they're supporters, because they have decided to come over and vote in the race and not for nefarious purposes. So although almost everyone is approved and hardly anyone is rejected, the membership list won't officially be updated in terms of numbers until all of that is finished.
So, Leah, does that mean that Pancholi looked at the numbers, saw how big it had been just after Nenshi announces, and read the writing on the wall, or was there some inside knowledge about how much success the Nenshi campaign has had in signing up new people?
No, nothing in addition to what Cheryl just outlined. Everyone gets the same information and everyone can interpret it how they like. And so, some candidates might see that and think, that it's distributed maybe more evenly across their competitors. They might look at that and still see a path to victory for themselves. She looked at those numbers and I'm not speaking out of turn because she said this in her video. She looked at those numbers and her assessment was that there was no longer a path to victory for any candidate. In fact, I think she said, and so her sort of intention was to sort of get behind who is likely going to be the next leader rather than to compete against.
Okay, so if this is going to be a leadership race where a lot of new members are going to have a huge role, Cheryl, what was the pre-existing base of members like? What was an Alberta New Democrat before this race got started?
Yeah, it's a great question because I think the answer to that has really evolved over the last decade. Like, I joined this movement when we were 4 seats, the fourth party, not even the official opposition. And the membership was a group of people who had been long dedicated to the NDP and had deep held values and beliefs and were dedicating a ton of their time to continuing to prop up the movement. And then after the 2015 historic election, through that campaign and after it, that membership and the support and the interest in the NDP just exploded. And I think the membership is pretty diverse now. There is, of course, that stalwart group of people who are attending every policy convention and are deeply invested in ensuring that the fundamental values of the party continue. And then there are new people who have come over who are there because they think that Danielle Smith and the UCP is bad for Alberta. And then there's everyone in between who believe, if you have these 2 parties to pick from, because Alberta, thank goodness, is now a 2-party system and we have a choice. If you have these 2 parties to pick from, the NDP is far closer aligned to their values as people and their vision of what they want for Alberta. So it's sort of a tough question to answer because at one point, maybe you could have put all of those members into one category, but I do think now the membership of the NDP is as diverse as the province.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think, for your national audience who might not be as familiar with Alberta politics, the Alberta NDP increased its vote, lost the last 2 elections, but increased its vote share in both cases. In the last election, came within a hair of winning government, won the majority of seats in Calgary, always seen as a weakness. And that was with Rachel Notley, an Edmonton. So there's discussion about, do we need a Calgary leader? Do we need an Edmonton leader? Well, Rachel Notley as the leader was able to grow support in Calgary and elect over a dozen strong MLAs with their own networks and reputations in the city. So we've seen tremendous growth. And I think that while I agree, I'll just add to what Cheryl's saying. I agree that the membership has diversified greatly and it would be harder to pick out an Alberta NDP by sight, at least. Now that it might have been 10 years ago. I think there's also a difference between because we see a relatively smaller membership base and NDP voters. And so the voters that the NDP can attract is a really competitive number in Alberta. Memberships are always a different thing and a much harder sell. So it is curious to me to see the large numbers coming in. Regardless of who's selling them, because that's a changing landscape for the Alberta NDP, I think.
It'll be very curious to see what the final numbers are. I can't recall the numbers who voted in Rachel Notley in 2014, but I think it was a couple thousand, 2 or 3 or 4,000 or something like that, right? So it'll be certainly a lot more people this time. How about we go through some of the candidates, all right? So there's 5 candidates that are still in the running, at least as of recording on Thursday. We'll see if anybody else decides they're going to throw in the hat as well. But maybe we can start with 2 of the candidates who are seen as having a bit of a longer shot. So we have Jody Callahoo-Stonehouse, who is a first-term MLA. And then you have Gil McGowan, who's the leader of the Alberta Federation of Labour. Both seem to not have as much of a chance as some of the more experienced MLAs and Naheed Nenshi. Why are they running, and what do they bring to the campaign? Cheryl, why don't you start?
Sure. I don't think either of these candidates would say that they don't have a chance. I think if you ask them, both of them are running campaigns to win. Is it a bit of a long shot compared to the other candidates? Probably, but they're both in it trying to win. And I think they both bring a really unique perspective that is not only great for the campaign overall, but really good for the discussion that it's forcing other candidates to have, and that it will force during the official debates as we make it through the next couple of months. Jody Callahoo-Stonehouse, as you said, she's a new MLA relative to her colleagues. This is her first term. This is an incredible profile and platform building exercise for her, even if she is unsuccessful. And if you look at what she's running on, talking about how important water is to everything, I'm not sure that would be a topic of this campaign had she not raised it. And then, of course, her representation as a First Nations woman in the race is really important. It's important to have those issues brought to the forefront. It's important for the NDP that our leadership contestants are diverse and that they're representing different communities and different backgrounds. So whether she's successful or not, she brings so much value to the campaign overall and so much value to the party overall. And it's not that much different for Gil, because the NDP, even on the prairies where we are a very pragmatic New Democrat organization, we are still rooted in the rights of workers. And I do think it's really important as well that Gil brings a breadth of history and experience and the voices of union members that he's been dedicating his career to for years now to the table as well, representing their viewpoints and representing what they want, because they are a cornerstone of the party and its values as well.
I couldn't agree more. I would just add that what I think they both offer that perhaps Kathleen Ganley and Sarah Hoffman don't is a little bit of what Rakhi had, which is that's not carrying the baggage, if you want to call it that, of the NDP's term in government. There's a lot to be proud. I'm proud of a lot of what we did there, but that is something for those like 3-term incumbent MLAs to negotiate as they make their new offer to voters. Whereas folks like Gil and Jody, Rakhi previously didn't have the same kind of tension around what they were offering for future voters relative to sort of what people experienced while the NDP was in government.
All right. Well, you mentioned the 2 more experienced MLAs. So they're both former cabinet ministers, Calgary Mountain View MLA Kathleen Ganley and Edmonton Glenora MLA Sarah Hoffman. Why don't we start with Ganley? Leah, what is she bringing to the race? What's her path? What's her strength in this contest?
Well, and again, until recently, she was the quote unquote Calgary candidate, and there was I didn't agree that postal code mattered. I said that on numerous platforms, but there is a contingent of people who felt very strongly that the next leader needs to be from. There's still people who believe the next leader needs to be from Calgary. So she had that edge, if you want to call it. I've worked with Kathleen. I know her quite well, and as a minister and as an MLA, Kathleen's very detail oriented, very policy focused, very scrutinizing. She'll comb through everything. So she's very practical when it comes to that, and takes decisions quite like from a logical place. So I think she's able to appeal to sort of that pragmatism, but also maybe a bit of centrism, in addition to being a 3-term NDP MLA in Calgary. That's also a great position of strength for someone who's had to fight constantly, both both to maintain her seat, but also to reflect that voice in caucus. So I think, she's got a few things going for her there. Maybe Cheryl can take Hoffman since since I gave that a good run.
Well, Cheryl, does she still have a path if there's now a Calgary, pretty juggernaut Calgary candidate in Naheed Nenshi?
I think she does have a path. I completely agree. Naheed has brought so much focus to this campaign. He's made national headlines. He's got, like you said, people paying attention in Toronto to the Alberta NDP leadership race, but people in Toronto don't get to vote. And although there's lots of attention on Naheed Nenshi, it's the members that will actually decide. And it doesn't necessarily mean that national news translates into how people feel on the ground inside the party. So I do think that Kathleen has a path. I think that, I know that Kathleen Ganley's campaign is selling thousands of memberships, even currently. And we have to remember that this is a preferential ballot. So if the remaining candidates, if people are looking for, let's say an anyone but Nenshi movement begins, or people are looking for those who have deeper roots in the party, you might see their twos or their threes roll up to candidates that are not Naheed Nenshi. And that could be the tipping point. We could see Naheed Nenshi in first place until we have the other candidates' ballots roll up, and then someone could jump ahead of him. So I think there is still a path for her. And I do think, I agree with Leah, postal code doesn't matter, but having a real relationship with people in Calgary and demonstrating a dedication to Calgary is necessary. And Kathleen has done that for nearly a decade now.
Okay, well, Sarah Hoffman, being the other MLA dating from the time that the NDP was in government, she was a deputy premier. Cheryl, she has seemingly the most name recognition after Nenshi from the polls that we've seen among the broader public. So that might mean that she might have a better chance of signing up lots of more new members than perhaps some of the other candidates. Is Sarah Hoffman, is she well positioned to be the anybody but Nenshi candidate in this race?
I think she's probably the favorite for longtime party members. Sarah has been around the NDP, been in the NDP and outside of the NDP and NDP adjacent for many, many years now. And she is a master at building personal relationships and maintaining them. And I imagine that there's many, many people who have been members for years now who automatically will go to Sarah Hoffman. And then, of course, her challenge is building outside of that and building in Calgary, which, the geography means that Edmonton candidates have to spend time in Calgary and Calgary candidates have to spend time in Edmonton. But I do think that for a long time, Sarah was seen as sort of the heir apparent. She was deputy premier in government and she's been deputy leader under Rachel Notley. So there is a lot of people who will automatically choose her. But I think some of it will come down to holding up ideas side by side. And we'll see some of that through the debates where people actually decide, we know her name. We know her dedication to the party, but does she have a vision for how we continue to build on our success over the next decade?
Leah, what do you think are Sarah Hoffman's kind of past weaknesses, her strengths?
Yeah, so I think it's exactly that. I in thinking about this race, I often think about it in terms of for the NDP kind of eras. So there's the Rachel Notley era. And Sarah Hoffman was such a big part of the Rachel Notley era that I think for people who are looking to hold on to that, she's probably their top choice. And also to Cheryl's point, that's likely going to be long-term party members. Whether she can reflect or she can invite the type of growth and compete with the growth candidates. So that's maybe how we could distinguish them. I think that's an uphill battle. But she's more distinct as a candidate. Her offering is more distinct as a candidate than someone like Kathleen Ganley. So if we are seeing a race that isn't over on the first ballot, which I think the numbers could well be interpreted that will be the case. But if we're imagining that Nenshi does not succeed in a first ballot win, then I do think that Ganley's the one who suffers from that probably the most, because you might see a 1-2 Ganley Nenshi, whereas I think you would see Sarah holds up pretty distinctly relative to their offers.
All right, so Naheed Nenshi gets into the race. Everybody talks about it outside of Alberta. I get the impression from a lot of longstanding Alberta New Democrats not as excited perhaps about some of the attention. But when you see, Pierre Poilievre, what he did for the Conservative leadership race, bringing in so many members that it didn't matter what anybody else was doing. You could say even Jagmeet Singh in 2017, when he won the federal NDP leadership, he brought in a lot of new members and was able to win on the first ballot. Cheryl, is that what we're going to have here? That it doesn't really matter how Nenshi is viewed within the NDP kind of core. It's just that he'll bring in so many progressives that he can just win, and it doesn't really matter what the party used to be.
I don't think we're at that point. Like he would have to bring in so many members that the first 16,000's vote didn't matter anymore. And I think even the members that he's bringing in right now are Calgarians and those from across Alberta who voted NDP in the past, supported NDP in the past, and are now taking the final step to hold a membership in the NDP. And I do think for those people, the fundamental values and the shape of the party really matters. So I think it's great. I'm so happy that Naheed Nenshi has raised the interest in the race, has brought attention to it. I think a rising tide raises all boats, and people are paying attention, and that is wonderful for us. I think the question of a lot of people who have felt aligned with the party or who have been members for a long time is, what direction would Naheed Nenshi take this party in? And if he is leader, would it still look like the NDP afterwards? And we are not a party that is willing to say we will win at all costs. We're willing to give up our identity, our values, just to be in power. There are parties like that in Alberta, for example, but the NDP is not that. And I think that the membership is really quite set on continuing to be the party that we have been for the last number of years.
Leah, how do New Democrats see Naheed Nenshi?
I couldn't tell you, honestly. I mean, for one, I remember when there was just speculation about him entering, and I thought, well, he's not going to excite NDP members, or he's not going to, he might have a pocket, or he might have some support in Edmonton, but there's no way he breaks through in Edmonton. And the more people I talked to, the more I was proven wrong in my own assumption of who we are as a party. And I think that's, interesting, because I think, to our earlier discussion, the Alberta NDP is quite a diverse group of people. But I also agree that there are boundaries around a value set that I think members will hold any new leader to. And so, I'm an undecided voter. I'm unattached to a campaign, so I'm not saying this for Nenshi's benefit, but I do resist and resent claims that he's not a real New Democrat, because he like tens of thousands of other people have recently purchased an NDP membership, and that makes them an Alberta New Democrat. Now, if I will be watching, and I am concerned about what the party will look like under any new leader, and I will hope that it both continues to reflect the values that solidify our identity as New Democrats, while balancing that growth and that competitiveness in the next general election. So, I mean, the short answer is I don't know, but I have been surprised by how many people I've seen in Edmonton, how many people I would have considered to be sort of those institutional long-term New Democrats who have been excited about the idea of Naheed Nenshi as leader.
Cheryl, when I'm watching this from the outside, you mentioned that Alberta is now a two-party system, and it is, and we've seen that develop over the last few years. Now it's starting to look more like, Saskatchewan or British Columbia, where it's a Conservative party versus a New Democratic party. And so how do you feel the party has evolved and kind of reacted to the fact that it's become more of the progressive, the center-left home for all those voters, rather than people who would have been further to the left, when they were voting for Brian Mason and people in the past? And what kind of challenges it kind of poses now, where you have someone like Naheed Nenshi who has more of a centrist, progressive kind of cred than someone from the left, which changes the party and how it's going to approach voters, Albertans, how it's going to do future campaigns.
Yeah, I can only speak for myself, and I'm lucky to have had sort of an inside view of a lot of this, but I think it's easy to run strictly on ideology when you have never held power. And it's easy to have really big ideas and really bold visions and maybe sit further to one side of the spectrum. And then you get into government and you open the books and you listen to the population, and you have so much more data and tools available to you that you start moving more to a logical position than an ideological position. And that's not to say that the NDP does not have any ideological position, but I think our party and where we sit in terms of, the things that Albertans care about most has been guided a little bit by having an inside view of the books and the numbers and what is possible for Albertans and what is in the best interest of the most Albertans. And I do think Rachel Notley made almost all of her decisions in government based purely on what she thought was in the best interest of the most Albertans. And because, she was the leader of the party moved that direction as well. And she's very compelling, and she brought the membership along with her. So yeah, the party has moved a little bit more to the center than it was maybe a decade or more ago. But it's more we're still New Democrats. We like to say, prairie pragmatic New Democrats.
Leah, if Nenshi wins, can he get the party behind him? He used to be a mayor. A mayor is a one-man show, right? It's not a team. You're not leading a party. There's no, at least there used to not be party politics in municipal office. I think that's going to change in Alberta soon. But how can he get the party behind him?
Yeah, that's going to be a big task. Well, look, in fairness, I think any new leader stepping into Rachel Notley's shoes is going to have a steep climb ahead of them. Him perhaps more so, but she's formidable. She's a force. She has, she has defined the Alberta NDP for so long now that anyone stepping into that role is gonna have a challenge. Him in particular, I think the biggest test for him is going to be how to bring people together, how to demonstrate that he can listen. He has a reputation that he's going to have to fight against, and that he's going to have to actively work against, in terms of being able to build and maintain coalition. As mayor, you can pick and choose based on what you're trying to move forward, who you build coalition with. But as a leader of a party, you need to keep your caucus strong and unified behind you at all times. And that's something that he's never had to do. And so I do think that that'll be a huge challenge for him. He has spoken to it. I know he spoke to it on Cheryl's podcast. She got a chance to ask him questions about that. And I think he seems to be aware that is a weakness or a challenge that he'll face. But I think for him, probably the best move if he were to win is to choose his top advisors very, very, very carefully.
Cheryl, what's your view on that? And also, if instead it does end up being Ganley or Hoffman, what their chances would be of getting everybody behind him after it's over?
I completely agree with Leah. I think Rachel has had a sort of quiet authority because she built the party from a much smaller position into government and then continues to be a competitive organization through the last two elections, despite losing them. And no one is going to come in with the kind of quiet authority and trust that Rachel Notley has had. It's going to be a battle for anybody. But I think the first place is spending time with your colleagues. And I've heard Naheed Nenshi, like Leah said, he talked about it on my podcast, going out and talking to every single MLA in your own caucus and spending time with them and carving it out in your schedule and making it a priority. That for me was refreshing because I think there are NDP leaders across the country who haven't made time for that. And eventually it breaks down. And that is, if you don't have your caucus behind you, you have no one behind you. So that was refreshing for me to hear that he recognizes that would be a big part of the job. I think the other challenge for someone who has served as mayor and then tries to transition into, the leader of a provincial party, especially in this position, is that he's going into opposition if he's successful. And the same goes obviously for Kathleen Ganley or Sarah Hoffman, although they understand the terrain a little bit better, is he's agreeing to not be in power for the next 3 years. And that is something I know that he has considered because, again, we talked about it, but, going in a place where you have, pretty big power in the mayor's office to a place where actually you're just fighting to discredit the government for the next 3 years before you have a chance at holding power again. That is a big decision for someone as they make that transition.
Mm-hmm.
For both of you, not a position you're often in, but if you're a conservative, which of these candidates do you want to see win? Do you not want to see win? Does the UCP care who ends up winning? Leah?
I'm sure they do. There's a long history between Danielle Smith and Naheed Nenshi. So I think I think for Conservatives, that's probably a bit of a double-edged sword, where they're drooling a little bit at the chance to go head to head with him again, and they're probably also nervous about his ability to bring the NDP to victory. So I think it's probably a mixed bag on the Conservative side when it comes to Nenshi. The other candidates, I think that what the other candidates have, and I know you've recently released numbers that show he's the most competitive against the UCP. So it would be easy to answer that's who they would most fear. But the other, what we don't know is whether or not he's at the floor or the ceiling. And the other candidates are more likely or have more opportunity to grow, given the lack of name recognition and sort of the lack of position in leadership. So I think if I were sitting in a government, I would be more comfortable with a known entity than an unknown entity in the other leaders. As in, I would be more interested in an Nenshi win than the others.
Yeah, there was the Advocacy poll that came out this past week showing Nenshi doing better than the others, but the others have such high unknowns, no name recognition, that a lot of voters might just be staying undecided because they don't know who these people are just yet. That's the opportunity, the promise, but also the risk, right? Because once you get introduced to someone, maybe you don't like them too. That's always a possibility. Cheryl, do you think the UCP has a real horse in this?
You know what? I just think that at this point in the election cycle, deciding who will be the fiercest opponent to Danielle Smith 3 years from now, it just doesn't make sense. Like, I know everyone wants to make their bets and pools, and I'm sure there are those within the UCP who have opinions on it. But like you said, if it is someone who has lower knowns, they have, 3 years now to build their persona, to build their profile, to, take a new tact when it comes to defining the NDP as an opponent to the UCP. And we don't know what the issues will be. I mean, today, yes, affordability and healthcare are top of mind, but in 3 years from now, we could see a completely different economic position. And maybe Sarah Hoffman's strong stance on environment will be something that Albertans are looking for. I just think it's too far out, and there's too many unknowns to really know who will be the best opponent. But I know it's fun to guess, but I'm not going to.
All right, we'll close on this. And Cheryl, I think you've already said so, but do either of you think this race is over, or there's still lots more running to go?
I don't think it's over. Like, I think Naheed Nenshi has had a wonderful 2 weeks, and I have really enjoyed watching it and watching the race and watching how it has pushed other candidates. But the vote is June 22nd. Like, that's when we get the result. So I think there's a lot more to come. And I think that candidates are, in this for the long haul and still have a lot more up their sleeves between now and then.
I think it looks like we've got probably a winner already set, but you never know. There's less than a month left, so the vote or the results will be revealed in June, but there's less than a month left to sell memberships. Of course, there's time after that to persuade people to move between camps. So again, we can't fully know what's going on in people's minds or behind the scenes, but I think it looks like we've got a winner in the head.
All right. Well, there's always a front runner, and I guess there's always a question of whether it's over or not. So we'll see. So thanks so much. Really appreciate you both coming on the show, and we still got lots of leadership race left to go. Whether or not it ends up being a landslide or not, we'll see. But we'll hope that the race isn't over, because a good race is always lots of fun. So thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.